My daughter passed away on a Friday. The following Monday morning, her bank called to tell me she had wired $40,000 to an account I didn't recognize at 11:47 p.m. the night before she died. Before I tell you what I found, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. My name is Roger Hamill. I'm 67 years old, and for 29 years, I worked as a licensed public adjuster in Portland, Oregon. If you don't know what that is, it means insurance companies paid me to find the truth inside claims. Every document, every timeline, every number that doesn't line up. That's what I look for every working day for nearly 3 decades. I retired in 2021. I thought I was done looking for things that didn't add up. I was wrong. My daughter was 38 years old. She had a condition she'd managed since her mid-20s, a heart arrhythmia, controlled with medication, monitored regularly. She was careful. She walked every morning, kept her appointments, called me every Sunday without fail. She was the kind of person who set calendar reminders for other people's birthdays, the kind of person who made you feel, without ever saying so, that she was paying attention. She had been married for 3 years to a man I will call my son-in-law. He was 34. He worked in digital marketing, which in my experience means different things depending on who you ask. He drove a truck he couldn't afford and wore the particular confidence of a man who had never been seriously questioned about anything. When my daughter introduced him to me, he shook my hand a half-second too long, the kind of grip that's performing something. I noted it. I didn't say anything because she was happy, and I have spent enough time in rooms with difficult people to know the difference between a feeling and a fact. They lived in a rental house in Beaverton. My daughter kept her accounts separate. That was her habit before the marriage, and she maintained it. She told me once, not as a complaint, just as information, that he had asked her twice to combine finances and she had said she needed more time. I remember thinking that was sensible. I remember thinking I was probably worrying for nothing. She died on a Friday morning in September. She had gone to bed the night before and did not wake up. Cardiac arrest in her sleep, sudden and complete. The paramedics said it would have been fast. I have held on to that for what it is worth, which is not much, but it is something. The funeral was the following Wednesday. 71 people came. My son-in-law stood at the front of the room in a dark suit and received condolences with a hand on his chest and his eyes appropriately lowered. My napper, told me he's in my house next week. I'm Robert. Banter service without being asked, which is something I will not forget. Afterward, we came back to my house. My son-in-law stayed 2 hours, then said he needed to get home to take care of some things. I watched him back out of the driveway. My daughter's friend, who had known her since college, watched him too. She didn't say anything. Neither did I, but we stood at the window together for a moment longer than necessary, and I think we both understood something that neither of us had words for yet. The call came 4 days after the funeral. I was in my home office sorting through the stack of papers that accumulates when you spend a week not paying attention to anything practical. The number was a Portland area code I didn't recognize. The woman on the line identified herself as a fraud prevention specialist at my daughter's credit union. She said she was calling because there had been activity on my daughter's account that required clarification, given the notification they had received from the estate. She asked carefully whether I was the designated contact for my daughter's estate. I said I was the executor, yes. She said she wanted to make sure I was aware of a wire transfer initiated from my daughter's online banking account the previous Thursday evening. $40,000. Sent at 11:47 p.m. to an external account at a bank in Nevada. My daughter had died Friday morning. I asked the woman to read me the receiving account information. She gave me a routing number and the partial account number she was authorized to share. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope. I asked her to flag the transaction and hold any further activity on the account pending estate review. She said that had already been done. I thanked her, put the phone down, and looked at the envelope in my hand. My daughter did not make wire transfers at midnight. She managed her finances the way she managed everything else, methodically, during daylight hours, with notes kept in a color-coded spreadsheet I had seen on her laptop screen more than once. She did not have accounts in Nevada. She had never, to my knowledge, lived in, worked in, or had any connection to Nevada. I put on my coat and drove to the credit union. The branch manager was a man named Carl, somewhere in his 50s, careful and decent the way people in that role often are when they understand the weight of what they're dealing with. He walked me through what he could share in person with the estate documentation I had brought. The transfer had been initiated through my daughter's mobile banking app. The session had lasted 11 minutes. It originated from an IP address registered to a device that was not my daughter's phone. I asked him to write that last part down for me. He did. On the drive back, I thought about the 3 years of the marriage. I thought about the 2 requests to combine finances, both declined. I thought about my son-in-law asking my daughter at Christmas 2 years ago whether she had updated her beneficiary designations and my daughter saying she hadn't gotten around to it and him saying something about how it was important to get those things in order. I had been passing through the room when that conversation happened. I had taken a glass of water from the counter and kept moving. I had filed it away. I am a man who files things away. I called an estate attorney the next morning. Her name was Denise Okafor. She shared the name of a woman on my daughter's contact list, which I took as a reasonable sign. She had an office on SW Broadway and a reputation I had confirmed the previous evening through 3 separate people I called who had dealt with Portland probate matters over the years. I left a message at 8:15 a.m. She called back at 8:52. I told her what I had. She said come in at noon. Denise was in her late 40s with the particular stillness of someone who had heard a great many terrible things and processed them into action rather than reaction. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her pen. She asked whether I had the estate documentation establishing me as executor. I did. She asked whether I knew where my son-in-law was currently staying. Still in the rental house, as far as I knew. She asked whether my daughter had a will. She did. Drafted 2 years before the marriage, never updated. The house contents, the vehicle, and the remainder of her accounts went to me. She had never changed it. Denise leaned back slightly. That's significant, she said. And it's likely why Thursday night happened. Someone who knew the will existed and knew they weren't in it had a very short window. She recommended a financial investigator she worked with regularly, a man named Ed Wachowski, who had spent 20 years with the Oregon Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Unit before going private. Thorough, she said, not chatty. Exactly what I needed. I drove home. My son-in-law called that evening, asking whether I needed help with any of the paperwork. His voice had the particular evenness of someone who has rehearsed being helpful. I said I was managing. He said to let him know. I said I would. I sat in my office afterward and opened the folder I had started that afternoon, the envelope with the routing number. Carl's written note about the IP address, the will, a copy. I added a legal pad sheet on which I had written, in the orderly columns of a man who spent 3 decades organizing evidence, dates, amounts, questions. Ed Wachowski called 2 days later after Denise had made the introduction. His voice had the compression of a man who had spent years being efficient with language. He gave me his rate, $20,200 for a full financial trace, and told me what he needed. Names, known accounts, any device information I had. I gave him what I had, the routing number. My nephew stood in my living room closing on my house next week. I'm Robert's financial institutions, the credit union, a savings account at a regional bank, and a brokerage account I'd helped her set up in 2018. He asked whether I had any indication of access to her devices. I thought about the 3 years of the marriage, about a man who lived in the same house as a woman who kept a color-coded financial spreadsheet. I said it was possible. One nod, or at least the phone equivalent. Sufficient, he said. While Wachowski worked, I did what Denise had told me to do. I stayed in contact with my son-in-law through brief, unremarkable text exchanges. I said nothing about the wire transfer or the credit union call. I processed the routine paperwork of an estate, The death certificates, the notification letters, the utility accounts, and I kept notes in a small leather notebook I had used for field work during my adjusting years. The habit had never left me. It just waited. 11 days later, Wachowski called. He came to my house, which told me the report was significant enough that he didn't want to discuss it on the phone. He set a 14-page document on my kitchen table and walked me through it the way someone walks you through a map, when they know the terrain and you don't. The wire transfer was the beginning, not the whole picture. Between April and August of that year, the 5 months before my daughter died, 7 transactions had moved a combined $28,400 from her savings account to an external account. The transactions ranged from $2,800 to $6,500. All 7 occurred between 10:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. All 7 were initiated from a device registered to my son-in-law. He had her banking credentials. He had been moving money while she slept. Wachowski turned to page 7. There was more. My nephew stood in my living room and told me the bank was foreclosing on my house and a beneficiary designation on file. When the account was opened, she had listed me as primary beneficiary. In January of the previous year, that designation had been changed through an online portal. The new primary beneficiary was listed as her husband. The change had been made from the same IP address as the wire transfer. I sat with that for a moment. The brokerage account held $214,000. Wachowski closed the report. He said the wire transfer Thursday night was a separate move. He was taking what he could before the estate locked things down. The beneficiary change was the bigger play. That was set up months ago. I paid him in cash. It felt like the right source. That afternoon I drove to Denise's office. She read the report while I sat across from her. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me with the expression she seemed to use when news was serious and actionable at the same time. She said she would file for a formal estate injunction on the brokerage account, freezing any disbursements pending legal review. She said she would send a formal notice to the brokerage firm that the beneficiary designation was under contest on grounds of fraud. She said the wire transfer documentation, combined with the device IP records, gave us a strong position on the criminal referrals she wanted to make. I asked what that meant exactly. She said financial elder abuse statutes in Oregon were broad enough to apply here, and that unauthorized account access and fraudulent beneficiary manipulation each carried felony exposure. She wanted to refer the matter to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit. I said do it. I drove home. My son-in-law texted that evening to ask whether I had looked into the life insurance policy. I had not thought about the life insurance policy. My nephew told me the Spansquisfert. I'm Robert. A $180,000 term policy she had taken out on Denise's advice, which I had always known about. I went to the file cabinet in the office where I kept copies of important documents for both of us. The original policy, dated 2016, listed me as primary beneficiary. It was there, but there was something else in that folder I had never seen before. A letter on the insurance company's letterhead dated 8 months prior confirming receipt of a beneficiary change request. The new primary beneficiary, her husband. The letter had been mailed to the Beaverton address. My daughter had never mentioned it. She may not have known it existed. I photographed the letter. I took it to Denise the next morning. She held it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called someone while I sat there. She spoke for about 4 minutes. When she hung up, she said the DA's office had agreed to open a preliminary inquiry. Not a formal case yet, but they were looking. Outside the window, rain on stubbled Broadway. Portland in October. The particular gray of it. My son-in-law called that night. He was friendly, measured, asking how I was holding up. He mentioned the brokerage account, said he had received a notice from the firm about the hold, and that he was sure it was just a procedural thing, but did I know anything about it? I said I had asked Denise to review everything carefully, and she was being thorough. He said that made sense, of course. He said he just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. I said I appreciated that. I kept my voice the same way I'd kept it in rooms with difficult claimants for 29 years. level without temperature. After I hung up, I took a small voice recorder from the desk drawer. I had kept one there since my adjusting days. Oregon is a one-party consent state. I had used it for field interviews, and I pressed record. I set it on the desk and placed a call back to his number. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had been going through some of my daughter's paperwork and found some documents I wanted to understand better. I asked him whether he had ever had occasion to access her banking accounts online, just to help her manage things, the way couples sometimes did. A pause of approximately 3 seconds. He said he had her passwords, yes. She had given them to him in case of emergency. I asked whether he had ever used them. Another pause. He said maybe once or twice to check a balance for her when she was busy. He said she had always known. I said I understood and that I just wanted to get the full picture for the estate paperwork. I thanked him and said goodnight. I stopped the recording. In Oregon, one-party consent applies to telephone calls. I had been a party to the conversation. What he had just said, that he had her passwords, that he had accessed her accounts, was now on record in his own voice, with his own phrasing. I labeled the file with the date and put it in the folder next to Wachowski's report. The injunction on the brokerage account went through probate court the following week. The firm received the notice and froze the account pending review. Denise told me he had called the firm directly, been polite, been told nothing. She said polite is usually a sign they have a backup plan. He did. 2 weeks after the injunction, a letter arrived at my house from an attorney I didn't recognize, a firm in Lake Oswego with a name that sounded like it had been assembled to imply stability. The letter explained, at some length, that as my daughter's surviving spouse, my son-in-law had a statutory right to a portion of her estate under Oregon intestate succession principles, and that contesting legally established beneficiary designations without cause constituted potential grounds for a counterclaim. I read it twice. I put it in a folder I labeled, with a certain quiet satisfaction, Exhibit A. I brought it to Denise the next morning. She read it without expression, then set it down. He's retained a litigator, she said. That means he understands the exposure now. She asked whether I was prepared for this to take time. I spent 29 years investigating claims that insurance companies paid me to disprove and that claimants had bet their financial futures on, I said. I understand that thorough work takes time. She almost smiled. She went back to her files. The DA's office made contact through Denise 3 weeks later. The investigator assigned to the case was a woman named Lieutenant Foss. She called me directly, which Denise said was a sign they were treating the matter seriously. She asked me to come in and bring everything: the Wachowski report, the IP documentation, the insurance letter, the recording, the wire transfer records. I came in on a Tuesday with a 2-inch binder and a copy of every document in chronological order. Lieutenant Foss went through it for 40 minutes with a yellow legal pad in front of her. She asked precise questions. She did not perform engagement. She actually engaged. When she finished, she said she wanted to apply for a warrant to pull his device records directly. She said the IP match from Wachowski's report gave probable cause, but she wanted the primary source. I said, whatever you need. She said the process would take several weeks. She asked me to continue as I'd been, present, unremarkable, not escalating. I drove home. My nephew sat in my living room and told me the foreclosing on my house next week. I'm Robert. We chatting and talked through everything without lawyers in the room. He said he just wanted to honor my daughter's memory and make sure things were handled with dignity. I read that text 3 times. I did not respond that evening. I wrote the text down in my notebook verbatim with the timestamp and added it to the binder. The following morning I called Denise. She said, do not meet with him without counsel present, and do not respond to the text. I said I know. I already knew. The warrant came through in the 3rd week of November. Lieutenant Foss called to tell me, in the way she told me everything, plainly and without theater. The device records confirmed what Wachowski's IP analysis had already shown. Every transfer, every account access, every beneficiary change, all of it traced to devices registered in his name. The Thursday night wire transfer had been initiated 47 minutes after my daughter's last recorded health monitoring app activity. The timeline was precise and damning. She said the DA's office was preparing to charge him with 3 counts: first-degree aggravated theft, fraudulent use of a financial transaction card, and unlawful access to a computer system, which under Oregon Revised Statute 164.377 carries a Class C felony. She said civil recovery action would run in parallel through Denise's office. She also said something I had not expected. The toxicology portion of my daughter's case, which had remained open as part of the standard review, had flagged an anomaly in the tissue samples. The concentration of her arrhythmia medication, a drug she took daily in a carefully monitored dose, was significantly elevated. The medical examiner's office had requested a secondary review. I sat in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and looked at the window above the sink. The rain had started again. November in Portland. I asked Lieutenant Foss what that meant in practical terms. She said it meant the case was being elevated. She said a detective from homicide would be reaching out to coordinate. She said she was sorry, Mr. Hamill. I said thank you for telling me. I set the phone on the table. I did not move for a while. I thought about my daughter at 30 years old, calling me from a pharmacy parking lot because she had just been diagnosed and she was trying not to cry and not quite managing it. I thought about how carefully she had managed that condition for 8 years. The monitoring, the medication love she kept on her phone, the follow-up appointments, the discipline of a person who had decided to take her health seriously rather than be frightened of it. She had been careful. She had been precise. She had not made a mistake. I thought about a man who lived in the same house as a woman who kept a medication log, who knew her dosages, who had her phone passwords. The homicide detective contacted me the following week. He was methodical, low-key, the kind of professional who does not give you more information than you have earned. He confirmed that the medical examiner's secondary review had concluded the medication concentration was inconsistent with her prescribed regimen and inconsistent with any plausible accidental cause. The matter had been formally elevated to a suspicious death investigation. He said he wanted to go through the timeline in detail. I said, of course. We sat in my kitchen for 2 hours. I gave him the binder. He photographed every page. On a Thursday morning in December, 2 unmarked county vehicles parked in front of the Beaverton rental house. I knew because Lieutenant Foss called me at 9:22 to tell me it was happening. I was in my home office. I had been up since 5. I had not been sleeping particularly well since November, but I had been working precisely, which is what I know how to do when there is nothing else to do. He was taken in for questioning that morning. His attorney arrived within the hour. By 2 p.m., according to Denise, the financial charges had been formally filed. By 4 p.m., according to Lieutenant Foss, the homicide unit had executed a search warrant on the house and recovered his devices, which had not been wiped, which told me something about the particular arrogance of people who believe they are the only ones paying attention. The arraignment was the following Tuesday. He entered a not guilty plea on all counts, which was expected. Bail was set and posted, which meant he had money somewhere that the audit hadn't reached yet. I passed that observation to Denise, who said she had already noted it. Denise filed the civil recovery motion the same week. The brokerage account remained frozen. The insurance company, notified of the ongoing criminal investigation, suspended processing of the beneficiary change pending outcome of the case. Denise said the original designation, naming me, would in all likelihood be restored once the fraudulent change was adjudicated. The $214,000 was in holding. The $180,000 policy was in holding. The $28,400 in transfers was subject to civil recovery. The $40,000 wire had been provisionally reversed by the credit union upon the estate injunction, and the funds were being held pending court order. I'm not, and have never been, a wealthy man. My daughter had built those savings over 15 years of careful, disciplined work. They were hers. She had meant them to go somewhere specific, and the only reason they were at risk of going somewhere else was that someone had calculated correctly that a woman who managed her health carefully, who took a medication daily, whose heart already required a certain chemical balance to function. that such a woman was vulnerable in a particular way. If you had access to her medicine cabinet and her trust, he had known. He had married her knowing. I spent those winter months the way I had spent the previous months, methodically. The binder had grown to 4 inches. I kept my Tuesday calls with Denise, my occasional check-ins with Lieutenant Foss, my attendance at the preliminary hearings, which moved through the Multnomah County Circuit Court calendar with the unhurried inevitability of institutional process. My son-in-law's attorney was capable. He filed motions. He contested the IP evidence on technical grounds. He argued the beneficiary change had been discussed with and consented to by my daughter, Denise, in written responses that had the particular quality of someone who finds other people's arguments slightly tedious, addressed each point with source documentation, and did not raise her voice once because she doesn't need to. Judge Harlan, who presided over the civil proceedings, was a man who had heard enough financial fraud cases to have developed a compact way of moving through them. He denied the IP evidence suppression motion in 2 paragraphs. At the criminal trial, which began in March, the prosecution laid out the device records, the transfer timeline, the medication concentration findings, and the testimony of the medical examiner. My recording, 3 minutes and 14 seconds in his own voice confirming access to her accounts, was admitted under Oregon's one-party consent statute without objection that survived. He sat through all of it in a way that certain people sit through things, still, composed, managing the surface. I had watched that kind of composure across a lot of tables in a lot of rooms. It is what you reach for when the facts are not on your side and performance is all you have left. On the 4th day of trial, his attorney approached the prosecution with a proposal. He would enter a guilty plea to second-degree manslaughter, reduced from the first-degree murder charge that had been formally added in February, and to the financial fraud counts. The sentencing recommendation would be 12 years. The prosecutor called me. She explained the offer, the legal reasoning, the calculus of a guaranteed conviction versus the risk of a sympathetic juror on the murder charge. She asked what I thought. I told her what I had told myself every day since November, since the toxicology call, since the moment I understood what had happened to my daughter in that house. I said the decision belongs to the people whose job it is to make it. I said I trust your judgment. I said do what you believe is right. She said, Mr. Hamill, I want you to know we are not taking a plea that doesn't reflect what he did. I said, I know. They took it under advisement for 48 hours. Then they rejected it. The trial continued. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On a Tuesday morning in late March, they returned. Guilty on the first-degree murder charge. Guilty on 3 counts of financial fraud. Guilty on the unlawful computer access count. Judge Harlan sentenced him to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. I was in the 3rd row. Denise was beside me. The room had the particular acoustic quality of a space where something significant has just been said, and everyone is absorbing it before making any sound. I did not feel what I might have expected to feel. What I felt was something simpler and harder than satisfaction. The particular stillness of a long process that has reached its conclusion, the understanding that the conclusion does not restore what was lost because nothing does that, but that it matters anyway, that it is still worth the months of early mornings and binder pages and careful phone calls and sitting still in rooms with people who did not think you were paying attention. It still matters. The civil recovery finalized over the following months. The fraudulent beneficiary designations on both the brokerage account and the insurance policy were voided. The accounts reverted to the original designations naming me. The $28,400 in transfers was ordered repaid through asset recovery from accounts identified during the criminal investigation. The $40,000 wire was fully reversed. I did not feel like a man who had won anything. I felt like a man who had done what his daughter had trusted him, without knowing she was trusting him, to do. In April, I repainted the room in my house that had been hers when she was growing up, not because it needed painting, because it was something I could do with my hands, and because the color it was had never quite been right, and because she had once, at 19, pointed to a swatch in a hardware store and said, "That one, that's the color of a good afternoon." I had not bought it then. I bought it now. 2 gallons of a warm particular blue. I painted it on a Saturday. The windows were open, and the air smelled like April in Portland, which is cold and clean, and something underneath that is almost hopeful. In her desk, her old desk, the one she had used through high school, the one I had kept in that room because I could not bring myself to move it. I found something in the top drawer when I was clearing space for the drop cloth. A birthday card she had given me 4 years ago, written in her handwriting. Dad, you always know what to do with broken things. That's not a small gift. I love you. I sat in the half-painted room for a while. Then I folded the card back into its envelope, set it on the shelf above the desk, picked up the brush, and kept going. I think about the birthday card a lot. Not the words on it, though I've read them enough times that I don't need to anymore, but the fact that she wrote it at all. She was 34 when she gave it to me. She had no reason to think it would ever matter, the way it ended up mattering. She just knew something true about her father, and she wrote it down. That's who she was. What happened to my daughter was not an accident of fate. It was a sequence of choices made by a person who had decided at some point before the wedding and possibly before the first date that she was worth more as a resource than as a life. He looked at a woman who was careful and organized and trusted the people she loved, and he saw an opportunity. That calculation, that coldness, is what I've had to sit with, not just the grief, which is its own country with its own weather, but the understanding that someone made a deliberate decision, and that decision ended her. I am not a man given to large philosophical statements. 29 years of adjusting claims will do that to you. You learn that the truth is almost always in the details, the timestamp, the IP address, the medication log she kept on her phone because she was that kind of person. The details don't lie. People lie. Documents, when you know how to read them, tell you exactly what happened. What I want to say to anyone watching this is something I learned not from a book or a classroom, but from a parking structure in Portland on a Monday morning with a phone in my hand and a routing number on the back of an envelope. Doing right by someone you love is not always loud. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just sitting still at a kitchen table at 6 in the morning, opening a binder, and writing down one more thing in the right column. That is what I mean by integrity. Not a word on a poster, but the actual daily practice of doing the careful thing even when no one is checking. My daughter had it. She kept her accounts separate. She maintained her medication log. She noticed when something felt wrong, even if she didn't know yet what to do with that feeling. She was a better investigator of her own life than most people ever learn to be. She deserved more time to use that. And what I mean by clear thinking, by actually using your mind rather than just reacting, is this: grief is real, and it will try to move you faster than is useful. The urge to confront, to accuse, to make noise. I felt all of it. I chose the notebook instead. I chose Carl's written note and Wachowski's 14 pages and a voice recorder in a desk drawer. I chose the thing that would actually work over the thing that would have felt good for about 45 seconds, and then collapsed in a courtroom. Staying with something hard over months without the satisfaction of resolution, that is a kind of endurance that does not announce itself. It just shows up every morning and does the next thing. That is what got him to that courtroom. Not rage, not luck, just one more day of staying in the work. She wrote, "You always know what to do with broken things." I don't know if that's entirely true, but I know I didn't stop, and I know that mattered. I know it was the last thing I could do for her, and I did it. That has to be enough. Most days it is.